warm up the oil in your hands for a little while to get the volatiles more volatile. And then you want to sniff it. And then the slurp part is you want to, like slurping wine, you need to bring in air as well as the oil.
Do that again, please.
You want to then switch it around in your mouth. Start from the 500.
Oh,
5 to 7,
No, I have to
5 to 7, 361, and 169.
so 5,
5
5, 2, 7 first.
Okay, and then finally what I want you to do is to record your first choice, your second choice, and your third choice. Everybody's going to be different, but I want to see which is, for the population that's here, I want to see which one is the first choice.
Do we need water afterwards?
Between your slurping, you want to take some water.
Okay.
Cleanse your palate. You want to bring in air with your, when you slurp it up, almost like slurping up a soup, Japanese soup.
Do we have too much air in? Which one is it? Get the pepper in there?
Start with 5 to 7, then move on to 361, and then the 169. Take a seat and you can follow the directions here.
Thank you.
Start with 527 and then move to 361 and then 169. And you want to rinse your mouth in between the samples. It's not wine, huh? This would be good at this.
We don't have to put anything in between, right? Just 1 or 3. The most like these plus.
Or
Come in. Come in.
if so actually, Yuriko,
Yes.
the one that's best like and least like, the other one must be number 2 then.
Why?
The middle is 2.
2, yeah. And then maybe after you're done, you can correct the.
It's difficult. I'm going round 2.
You know, if you really need another sample, we have extra samples here. You can follow the directions, warm up the samples, and start from 5 to 7.
This one's first. Second, third, first. Then have to bring it.
No, there's no right or wrong answer on this one, it's just your own preference.
Okay, and you have to choose which is your favourite, your least favourite, number 3. Okay, 1, 2. You choose what the taste of it. And then have some more.
That's so mean.
Does anyone need some more water?
Yes, please.
It's just been polite.
This on your own personal stash.
Well, actually, I'm sorry. If you could even put it in your hand,
Yeah, you're a natural.
Actually, I just wanted, you can make comments, but I just wanted your ranking. 1, 2, 3.
Still last one.
Tasting, okay.
This is if you want another round.
Yeah.
I'm trying to.
Okay, did everybody finish?
Just got one more.
Okay.
With food is better. Maybe just a really quick introduction. Is that all right? We've just done our introductory tasting, but we haven't done our introduction. This is Professor Iwaoka. I think it's written down there, all the way from Hawaii, Manoa. Probably a lot of us would like to be in Hawaii now, tonight, with the rain and possibly snow later on. This is our 4th ELP lecture in the Gaikoku Kyoiku department, and we're honored to have a visiting professor share his knowledge. It's already looks really interesting. Professor Iwaoka will be with us until the end of next spring. So I think there'll be plenty of time to go out and sample olive oil in with other foods perhaps and or use the knowledge we're going to learn today. So we just give a nice welcome. And thank you guys for coming out on such a cold day. So thank you.
Thank you. At the end, we'll see what the tally looks like. I wanted to see, I tried to choose different types of olive oil and wanted to see what the palette would be like from the Japanese standpoint, so we'll be able to see and compare what you have versus what the people in the United States would choose, as well as those in Europe. Okay. I did some work in, well, we're trying to grow some olive trees in Hawaii. And so I went to Spain to take a look at how they process. We're thinking about perhaps trying to grow olives to make olive oil, but that's not a wise economic decision, and I'll tell you why later. But anyway, it got me going, and I found it very fascinating, and I thought I would share some of the experiences with you. You look at definitions, the significance, the locations where they grow, conditions in cultivation, production in Spain, traditional and modern, and then the world marketing. And we'll talk a little bit about what was handed out to you in terms of your handout about olive oil fraud. So we'll talk about that at the end. Maybe I'm going to be in your way, so maybe you might want to move on the side, or I wasn't going to be blocking your way. There's different types of olive oil, extra virgin, and you're all familiar with that. That's really the first press. It's not, there's no solvent extraction. Then there's refined olive oil. Sometimes olive oil breaks down because they're holding the olives too long. So they need to clean it up, and then they cannot call it extra virgin anymore. And sometimes when you want to sell your product for a little bit higher, you can mix some of the refined and the extra virgin, so you have somewhat a taste, but it's not 100% extra virgin. And then there's this thing called pomace oil. Olives are one of the few, olive oil is one of the few oils that come from a fruit. It's not from a nut, peanut, corn, or seed. Safflowers, sesame, they all come from seeds, but olives, it comes from the fruit, not from the seed. So when you press the pulp and you extract the oil, there's still oil left in the pulp yet, and so they extract it with solvent, and then they call it pomace oil. Olives started to grow in the Eastern Mediterranean, more toward Iran and Syria, that area, and it spread westward. It's very prominent in the Mediterranean diet, which is what you've heard about. They're saying that the Mediterranean diet is healthy, and they say that olive oil plays a major role in the countries around the Mediterranean. It's starting to gain popularity in the US, and I guess it's also in Japan as well. I see so many different brands of olive oil in the supermarkets here. And the biggest production would be in Spain. They account for over 50% of the olive oil production. And of course, it's gaining popularity in the United States and actually all over the world. So with the great demand for olive oil, there's a lot of opportunity to maybe dilute the oil a little bit. You really can't tell unless you do a chemical analysis of the oil. This is the consumption per liter. Italy, Spain, and Greece are the biggest consumers of olive oil. The United States is less than a liter, and I think it's starting to increase. I'm not sure, I don't have any figures for Japan. I put Italy has a deficit because if you look at the total amount of olive oil consumed in Italy, they're not producing enough. So they have to bring in oil from other areas. This is the climate where they grow olives. the red areas. On the west coast of the United States, the Mediterranean area, in Chile and Argentina, in Australia. Note that we go on the 40th north and south parallels, and look at where Japan is. But you'll see why it's really not that feasible to grow olive trees in Japan. And this is, you cannot see it, but this is Hawaii. And it's not quite on the 40th, but as you go up in elevation, it has the right conditions for growing olive shrubs and trees, so that's why I got interested in it. This is what we started to do, and this is only about 3 years ago. We started to plant different varieties, and it grows really fast in Hawaii, of course. It's about 10 feet tall in about a year. But these are the conditions that you need for olive trees. Long dry season. In Japan, you don't have that. You need low humidity. You don't have that. Most of the soil over here is acidic, so because of all the rain and all of the organic matter. And if you go further north in Japan, you're going to have you're going to hit the lethal temperature. It'll kill the plants. So this is how they do the planting. And when the olives have been harvested, they prune the inside parts of the tree so that sunlight can go in, so that you can have olives on the inside of the bush. And the Spanish have a term, habla con el olivo, which is talk to the trees and basically be nice to it, because then it's going to help give you more production. But as you'll see in the movies, I don't think they're taking that good care of the trees. Anyway, we'll take a look at that. There are hundreds of varieties of olives. These are the most common ones. The manzanilla are the ones that you see in most of the jars and cans, because they're small, they're round, and they're easy to work with. You have big ones and real small ones, but the manzanillas are the ones that are the best for eating. These are really not trees, but they're shrubs, because they have a shallow taproot. They don't go that far deep, 5 to 60 inches, or 5 feet, 12 to 150 centimeters. They do plant them in rows, and you see why. And then they put grass in between to prevent erosion, because it's so dry there. Once it rains, it just washes out the soil. This is what the farms look like in Spain. The whole southern area is just covered with olive trees. They have over 6 million now, and most of the production is in the southern area. The north is a little bit too cold, and it's not dry enough. It starts to get wet. And this is what it looks like in February through September, where it starts to flower and fruit. And then anytime in October and November, you start harvesting your olives. You have to be real careful when you harvest at the right time, because there's only, in the large plantations, there's only one time that you harvest. So you gotta get it at the right timing. Okay, now you wonder, what is high quality oil? The high quality oil comes from the more green olives. It has a lot of the antioxidants, the tannins, the flavor compounds. As it starts to ripen, it starts to get less tart, it's not as flavorful. And when you get the very ripe olives, when it's black already, very mature, you hardly have any taste to it. However, take a look at the yield of, or the content of the olive oil in the olives. When you have a high quality, when you're going to have a high quality oil, the percent of the oil is only about 8% in the fruit. As it starts to mature and it starts to get ripe, the oil content increases, but then the taste starts to decrease. And you can get 20% oil at the very bottom. However, it's very bland. So the producers have to balance off high yield versus taste. So this is where actually the Italians are really good at blending. And we'll see a little bit later. Okay, this is the more traditional processing. This is how they used it in the past in Spain. They had large stone rollers, and these are rollers that actually were used in Roman times as well. They used animals and to power the rollers. And now they had, in later times they had electrical motors to help move the rollers to crush the olive pits as well as the fruit. So everything was just crushed. And they used these mats to squeeze out the oil. They would put the olive, the mash, in between these mats, and then they would put heavy weight on it, and then they would then press it. And you squeeze out all the oil and the water. And then when you put the oil and the water together, the oil will go rise to the top, and the water goes to the bottom. The biggest problem that they had is it was difficult to clean, and if you didn't clean it well, bacteria, yeast, and mold would grow. So you have a musty oil flavor if you didn't clean your mats at all. So that was not a good way to do it. This is olive.
Luego el aceite del agua, ¿vale? Se sacaba por la puertecita, los cogíamos con la espada, los metíamos en los cabachos, que estaban en unos vagones, y la prensa es la que la iba subiendo, ¿vale? Una prensa hidráulica, ya no necesitábamos y cuando iba hacia arriba, prensaba y por el tubito que veía aquí, sacaba el aceite del agua que volvía a descansar, ¿vale?
Anyway, this was a demonstration that they had at a small factory. It was a museum that they had that showed how they did it in the past. This is the processing for olives. You harvest, collect it, transport it to a plant, clean, remove all of the branches, the leaves, and then crush the olives. After you crush it, you have this mash, and the oil will be in small droplets, and so you have to mix it slowly to allow the oil droplets to coalesce, to come together. That takes about 90 minutes. And then they centrifuge out the oil. And then there's another centrifugation, higher speed centrifugation after that, where they take out to separate the water from the oil. And then they put it in storage tanks and allow it to settle again to separate out all of the water and the oil. This is where you have the dry waste, the wet waste, and then you have olive oil. After it's been settled, you either export it, in Spain anyway, or then they bottle it. Most of the small operations bottle 100% of the oil. The large companies send away in large tankers about 90% of the oil, and maybe they bottle about 10% of the oil that they make. There's a number of different ways of harvesting The easiest for the small farmer would be to harvest by hand. And if you have a large trunk, you know, the tree doesn't move too much, so you gotta go and pick it by hand. You don't crush the olives, but then it's very time consuming. Now, there's an automated harvester. There's an 8-person gang. This is in a plantation in Spain. They spend about 30 seconds per tree. They can get about 15 to 20 tons of olives a day. What they do is they set up the net on the ground. The olives fall in the net. They collect the olives in a tarp, and then they transfer it to a small truck to bring it to the processing plant. Now, remember I said that you want to talk to the olive trees to help them produce a lot, but this next movie clip will show you that, gee, they don't seem to be taking too good a care of the tree.
Count the seconds.
30 seconds. See all the olives are falling down? There's just one pass, and that's it. Anything left over, it's not being used anymore. So that's why they have to time the harvest really critically, because if they go too early, then they're not going to get a yield. If they wait too long, if it starts to rain, you're going to get mold and bacteria and yeast starting to grow, and so you lose you're going to have an off flavor of the olives. So I thought this was the plant that we visited and the plantation. I thought they really had good quality control. So that was an 8-man gang. There were about 4 people or 3 people hitting the tree with the driver, and then there's another 4 that would scoop up the olives from the tarp and then transport it into and put it into a container that they can bring it to the area where they're loading it into trucks. Then there's a 1-person operation. The production is about they can collect about twice as much olives. And this is a 1-person operation. It is limited by the tree height. It has to be a certain height. So it just goes over the tree, shakes it, and collects the olives. It's a lot more efficient this way, but the tree has to be a certain height. It cannot be any taller. Lastly, I didn't get a chance to see this one, but this one collects about twice as much as a single-person operation, and you can adjust it to the tree height, so it doesn't matter, but it collects about twice as much as the single height tree. So what happens is they collect for the first operation, they collect it in tarps, they pull it together, and then they bring it to a central loading zone where they put it in bins and then they load the trucks. And these are the kinds of trucks that they use. So if you look at the quantity here, if you try to do something like this in Hawaii, there's no way you can do that in terms of the amount of olive you need for olive oil. I just want to use the one question before I move on. What is the size of the trucks that are bringing the olives to the factories? stand within 24 hours, or 12 hours actually. Otherwise it starts to spoil, particularly because it's going to get crushed and you're going to have yeast and bacteria starting to grow. Then they bring it to, it goes on a conveyor belt. And then they remove the stems, they take away the debris. And the debris is actually over there. So there's a lot of rubbish that's accumulated. So then it then goes to the crushing machine, and then you have the mash, all of the crushed seed as well as the fruit. So the olive mash or mix is then slowly moved around. You disrupt the emulsion, and so you want the large droplets to coalesce. It's about 45 to 90 minutes for this to occur. And then you have these large centrifuges that would separate out the oil and the water from the pulp. And then this is what it looks like after the first separation. So this is oil and water together. And then you add some warm water, and then you go to another centrifugation to separate out the water and the oil. And the oil is then stored in these large tanks so that it can settle. A lot of the residue and the crud goes on the bottom, as well as the water. And you can drain it off. And then you have your oil. This is a small processor. He has four small tanks. And this is really for niche market production. They don't sell in large supermarkets. And the large the large processors have 80-ton tanks and 125-ton tanks. So very large tanks for storage of the oil. The small oil processors, they bottle all that they produce, and the large production operations, they send most of the oil out to other countries. I noticed Japan is starting to buy some now. I have a bottle here that is an Ajinomoto brand. And that's interesting. I'll talk about that more a little bit later. They bottle only 10%, so that's their bottling operation. Very small, but they're not into bottling for the Spanish market. They're more producing large quantities for export. I was very impressed with the quality of the quality control. They had a lot of latest equipment to measure the different aspects of the oil to make sure that it has a high quality. I would buy this oil anytime. So what they do with the dry matter is they dry it, and then they use it for heating their water so that they have water for processing. And then they have the wet waste going into a conveyor area where they then sell the wet waste to farmers. This is an old, 5 years, 6 years old now, but this is where most of the raw market goes: Spain, Italy, Greece. This is the production. So if you look at most of the countries around the Mediterranean, now you have Australia and Chile and Argentina producing olive oils. And they're pretty good as well. So again, this is the quality. You have high quality oil, 8% production. This is the aroma and the flavor. Green herb. It may smell like grass. It has a very bitter, astringent. I don't know if you noticed it, but when you tasted the olive oil for some of the oils, when you swallowed it, there was a slight burn in the throat. That's an indication of a high quality oil. Because you have a lot of tannins, antioxidants, other compounds in it. The bland oils probably don't have any of those compounds. So, or it was very ripe. Oops. This is an American brand, but you can also find some of these similar type products in the Japanese supermarkets. Extra light, and they have to find a way to sell it. For baking, frying, and deep frying, so that this is the oil that really doesn't have too much flavor in it. So I'm not sure. Again, you need to find out. You need to use a chemical analysis to find out if the oil has been adulterated or not. If they added, for example, corn or safflower oil to the olive oil, if you just taste it, you really can't tell. This one is used for roasting, grilling. And notice that it's extra light, original. There's no mention of extra virgin. So it was either the refined or the reconstituted oil, the second two. This happens to be the first press on the extreme right. It's usually going to be selling for a little bit more than these other two. The Italians are good at blending oils. So for this particular brand, notice that it was packed and that it's a product of Spain, Italy, Greece, and Tunisia. So they're buying oil from a lot of different places. They say that the Italians are really good at knowing what the American market wants, because that's one of the biggest consuming areas. And they're able to blend it so that it's not too astringent, it's not going to burn too much, just a little bit of a burn. The Spaniards don't know how to do that. If you really want good quality oil, most of the bottles, it's going to be expensive, but most of the bottles will tell you what variety it is. And these are Spanish oils. You can tell that this happens to be a variety of Aquinia and the Manzanilla oils. This one is a Picual variety. So they'll tell you what it is for the real high quality oils. This is what, 250 mils, I think. Sells for about 1,000 yen. And I paid about this is 200 mils. I paid about 750 mils for that. Or maybe more. But anyway, it's very expensive because it's a single variety oil. Oops. And these are 20 mil that they just pack in these little bottles. You don't want to get those. They're really, this is for the tourist market, and it doesn't really taste that good. So I visited this particular plant as well as the Basilico. These are some of the people I worked with. References, and I can give that to you. And they have Aloha in one of the town. They had a shop in one of the small towns in Spain, so I took that and says, Aloha and thank you for coming, and arigato gozaimasu. Oh, no, before we do that, I'd like to do a tally. you tell from this? Seems like, well, this is really not there's not enough numbers for statistical. It's all over the map. But let me tell you what they are. This one looks like maybe the people like this one the most. 7 and the third is evenly distributed among the third. The first oil, 527, which is this one here, people somewhat liked it. I'm sure you've seen this before. Non-extra virgin. So it's a mix. 361 is Bosco. This is actually it's an Ajinomoto label. So the people that, if you look at the Ajinomoto brand, the manufacturers of the Ajinomoto olive oil, they're also bottling this. This is Italian. Well, this is Italian. This is Italy. I'm sorry, this is the Ajinomoto brand. So it's coming from the Ajinomoto label. Says it's coming from Spain. Notice the cap. Very same, very similar. This happens to be a Spanish olive oil. The last one. That's the most astringent. And that seems to be the high quality one. The more astringency, the more burn in the throat, it's indicative of greener olives, higher quality. And even if they do dilute it with other oils, there's enough of the compounds in there, the antioxidants and the tannins and the flavor compounds that you really can't, unless you're an expert taster, you really can't tell whether it's been adulterated or not. So this is what it looks like. In the US, the blander oils are the most preferred. The US population, they don't like the strong, they don't like the burn. And if you go to Spain and Italy, you're never going to see anybody choosing this oil. They're going to choose the 169, the one that has a strong flavor. And that's what they use on bread and they put olive oil and garlic on the bread for breakfast. Okay, any questions?
Yeah, you mentioned the different varieties of olive oil, olive bushes or shrubs, many different varieties, and then you told us how to harvest them, and there's the machine that is based on height.
Yes.
Does that mean that those shrubs have to be a particular variety? Do some grow taller, or is it just how old they are, or how they're trimmed?
Either how old, you can use it only for a certain length of time, or it doesn't matter on the variety. Yeah. If you looked at the shoot that goes up, that's after they dump the olives, they have about 5 or 6 shoots, and each variety goes into one shoot. So they keep track of which variety and from which farmer the oil was made from. olives came from. So if there's any quality problems, they go back to the farm.
Yes, you partially answered the question. We were asking us what kind of quality control on the trees, so to speak, rather than before it's
They go out and inspect to see if there's any infestation of insects. It's so dry there, it's so hot, that usually the trees or the olives don't get attacked until it starts to cool down in September, October. And November is real critical because it starts to rain in Spain. And so that's when it becomes real critical when to harvest, because then they have to, you notice that there was a real nice day when they were harvesting. You can't harvest it on a wet day.
At what point would they call a halt on collection? Would it be a few trees or
I'm sorry, I didn't quite
at what
understand.
point would they decide not to harvest?
You know, if,
You have some harvest trees.
oh, I see. You know, I'm not sure on that. And there's an assumption that most of the trees have been fertilized and are in production. And when you go through it with those mechanical harvesters, you don't go and check each tree. You just sort of look at sample trees in that whole lot and to see the ripeness and the time and the degree of ripeness. So that's real critical because they need to know when they're going to harvest it, whether they're going to make a green, really high quality olive oil, or in this kind of situation, they would go more toward a higher yield of oil. So in these large plantations, they want the yield. So they're not going to be harvesting the green olives. Whereas these niche market operations would want that high quality because they can get the higher prices for them. They would be harvesting when the olives are greener.
Which oil would you use for cooking? Because when I cook, if I use extra virgin, it seems to be too strong. Is that just my taste? Or
You want to use, now there's an assumption here that this is really all olive oil, and you want to use the one that is the least flavorful. You want to use these for salads, because then you have the strong flavor, putting on bread and garlic. So when you're not going to be cooking, because in the cooking process you're going to be destroying the tannins and the antioxidants.
There's a small island called Shodoshima in Seto Naikai near Shikoku, and they grow olives there. And so, but I don't think they have a long dry season or humidity is low or anything. So I'm wondering if they came up with some kind of new species or something.
You know, I haven't heard about that, but theoretically you could breed the olives to grow in more humid climate over the long course of, over a period of time. And so, the question is, do they want to make olive oil? Or actually, that's a good question, because when I started to look at, for my research, I said we started to look at growing the trees for olive oil production, but then I realized you need so many trees. And so the better thing to do is to actually harvest the olives and make olives to eat. So I'm not sure if they're doing olive oil.
I think they have a lot of different kind of products, and one of them is oil, but they make sugar-coated olives for snack, munch or something.
Yes.
So maybe, and they even have olive soap bar or something.
So for something like that, when you make olives to eat, you don't have any waste. you know, you saw how much waste there is because you only get 20% oil at the max. That means 80% is throwaway. So it's inefficient in terms of, I mean, it's a high quality oil, but you know, you only get 20%, but you gotta throw away everything else. But if you use if you pickle the olives and make those things, you use 100% of it and you don't have any waste. So my recommendation to the Hawaii farmers would be to go and not do olive oil, but to make olives to eat. To make things like, you can make Tsukimono olives, I'm sure, kimchi olives. You know, so make use of the unique Hawaiian environment to create a flavor that's unique to Hawaii. And I'm sure that's what Japanese are doing.
Does the same thing regarding taste apply also to the olive fruit?
Theoretically, you know, you're treating olives, you cannot pick it off the tree and eat it. It's so bitter.
That's good to know, actually.
You know, I see a lot of olive trees as I go around here, and I'm sure there must be fruits from here in small quantities, but you can't pick them and eat them. There's a lot of bitter compounds in there, and what they do to process them is you can either score the olives and soak them in water, and if you do it in your home kitchen, it takes about 3 weeks. Or you can treat it with sodium hydroxide, drain cleaner, a dilute solution. What that does is that it leaches out or destroys a lot of the compounds. So in that process, you get edible olives, but then in that process you also destroy a lot of the compounds that are the ones that you're looking for. So I suppose if you soak them in water and I tried to do that and prepare my own olives, it takes about 3 weeks. You gotta change the water twice a day for 3 weeks. You know, it's just a bucket of olives, but then you might save some of the antioxidant compounds in here. But you want to leach out all of the bitter principles. Otherwise, it's really difficult to eat fresh olives.
You talked about on the labeling that the lower the percentage of olive oil, the higher the quality. How low does that number go? I mean, you said 20%, 12%, 8.5%. Does it go even lower than that?
You know, if you go lower than that, you might be harvesting the olives a little bit too green, and you're going to have super bitterness. So yes, you can have 1 to 2. I mean, at the initial, when it's ripe, and then it starts to go into the reproduction mode, then it's going to start to produce the oils. The idea of the olive in doing that is to make it desirable for insects and birds and things to eat it so that it spreads the seed. So if the seed is not mature and you have a green olive, and if the birds would eat that, it's going to be so bitter that they're not going to eat it. So you don't have to wait until it ripens. And then, so then it really tastes good for the birds and for the insects and the animals. Then you're going to be able to spread your seeds.
So the highest percentage that you usually can buy on a really high quality olive oil is going to be around that 8.5%.
Actually, it's going to be 100% oil.
But
It's just going to take a lot more olives to make a good quality oil, because it's only 8% versus the 20%. So you can get twice as much oil from a fruit when you process it.
Why did you get interested in olives in the first place? What's your research area?
Well, somebody said, how about helping me see if olives would be a feasible crop for Hawaii? And I said, sure. I said, if that gives you a chance to go to Spain, why not? So anyway, I spent 4 months in Spain doing something very similar that I'm doing here. And so we were able to see the whole processing operation and look at different production facilities. But I like to eat also. and olive oil is one of my favorite oils to cook and use.
May I ask what those numbers mean? 53761. Do I see those numbers on the bottles when I go to grocery store?
If I were to do this, if I were to label the cups, A, B, C, you might be biased and think, A must be the best. So by putting on digit numbers, you don't see that as this is the best, this is the best, this is the second best, this is the third best. You don't even think about that. So the numbers are just to identify the sample, but if I were to ABC or 1, 2, 3, you would be biased. So this is a century evaluation technique that we use in food science that when we want to sample the population so that the panelists are not biased. Normally they have blue cups, so you cannot see the color of the oil.
Yeah.
Notice the oil color. The one, the first one is very light, so it's been cleaned up, so there's no flavor to it. I don't know if you noticed that. Yeah. But there's no flavor to that first oil. But some people preferred it. So maybe the Japanese don't like the strong burning sensation, the people living here. Any more questions? Yes?
So what's the difference between virgin olive oil and extra virgin olive oil? Does that mean that they're just like more careful in the process when it's extra
I don't think
virgin?
I've seen the term virgin olive oil.
I was reading here in the article, and it mentioned that like, oh, Canada's doing a good job about monitoring fraud and in the drug regulations, and then it mentions, however, it doesn't distinguish, it doesn't have a like distinguishing factor between virgin and extra virgin.
You know, I'm not sure. I've only heard extra virgin, which is the first press. Anytime you do anything else to the oil other than pressing it out or centrifuging or not using any kind of solvent extraction, you cannot call it virgin or extra virgin oil, which is this one here. The Ajinomoto one is extra virgin, and this one also, and this one here. The last one is called, when you take the pulp and then you extract it with solvent, they call it pumice oil. This is the first time I've seen it. I saw this at Daiso. More because I had never seen pumice oil before. But it looks like, talking about fraud and adulteration, you can never tell whether these companies have diluted it with other oils. If you get a real strong, good tasting oil, if you put 10% safflower or corn or other oil in it, you're still going to have that burn yet. But then you diluted the olive oil. So I'm not sure. There's been a lot of fraud going on and a lot of adulteration. And so this is one of the few industries that's not regulated. So virginity, I think they mentioned that in this particular article, talks about all of the fraud that has been occurring in Italy, where they're diluting out the oils and selling it as extra virgin. You can't really tell the consumer. So if you go with an oil that has the variety on it, it's very expensive, but then you know that you're getting a pretty good quality. Most of the California olive oils have the variety on the bottom. I haven't seen any California oils. I think the market is, the production is still too small yet. You're not going to have the kind of production you had in Spain, so you're not going to be able to produce that kind of quantity. But if you get the chance to go to California and if you go to some of these specialty markets, you'll see the California varietal, a variety on the bottom of the labels. Those are the ones I think are pretty good.
The term extra virgin is a misnomer anyway, isn't it? I mean, you can't get any more virgin than virgin. It's like being a little bit pregnant.
I'm not sure whether it's actually- But you're right, yes.